Hello there. Today I thought I'd draw some mystery engines. Now, I've drawn a good number of mystery engines from the original Railway series books, but Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends has its own set of mystery characters who are never mentioned or seen. Today, I've picked 3 engines to draw and flesh out into characters. Time to put pen to paper, or indeed pen to screen. In the episode Thomas in Trouble, the Fat Controller is having toast and marmalade for breakfast when his butler comes in to tell him he's wanted on the telephone. As he's saying this, we see a painting on a wall in the background, featuring an old steam engine. According to Robert Goldgalliers, the art director for the classic episodes of Thomas, this painting was made to match the various Victorian-era portraits seen elsewhere in the show. The engine wasn't given a name at the time, but was retroactively named Ernest, not to be confused with Ernest, or Ernest for that matter. Ernest is based on the Jenny Lind type engine, a class built by E.B. Wilson and Company between the 1840s and 1860s, with 70 odd engines being built, with similar engines being made by rival manufacturers. Now, it's worth noting that the TV series has its own continuity and lore separate from the original Railway series books. Depending on who you ask, there may be more than one continuity. I believe that several of the show's writers have said that they consider the whole TV series to be a single timeline, spanning from Season 1 up until the end of the CGI series with Season 24. The show has contradicted itself over the years, however, which brings this idea into question. Most notably, there's The Adventure Begins, which retells the first few episodes from Season 1 whilst changing elements, such as James arriving on Sodor in a black livery as per the book, and Henry being literally afraid of the rain instead of being worried about his paint getting spoilt. I think the best way to view it is that there are perhaps 3 timelines, but it can be assumed that if an event from any given episode or special doesn't directly contradict the events of an episode from a different era, then it happened in all 3 timelines. I'm saying all this because I'm combining different eras of Thomas and Friends here. Ernest's portrait appeared in Season 1, indicating that he's canon to the classic series. We're not really given any indication as to what Sodor's railways were like in the 19th century. The various Victorian-era railways that I've talked about in previous videos are only canon to the original books. But we know of a major town on Sodor that had a rail connection in the olden days, and that is Great Waterton. Great Waterton was created specifically for the TV series, so I figured that this was as good a chance as any to talk about this historical town. I really like Great Waterton. It's perhaps the ultimate example of one of the show's recurring themes, taking something old and deteriorating and breathing new life into it through restoration. We've had it with engines, stations and windmills, but for it to happen to a whole town is something else. The model work of Great Waterton is some of the best in the show, which is saying a lot considering that most of the sets of this era had much to be desired. It's a shame that the town never made it into the CGI series. It certainly would have helped to break up the monotony of the generic countryside sets, especially during the early CGI seasons. Anyway, I've waffled on for too long about things that aren't the engine in question, so let's get back to Ernest. Given his name, I like to imagine Ernest as a bit of a serious, sincere sort of engine who is devoted to getting a job done well. If we are to assume that he was the first engine on the island, it's possible that he felt a strong sense of responsibility since the people of Sodor depended almost entirely on him to travel from place to place or get goods delivered from here to there. When other engines began arriving on the island, Ernest's workload was lessened, but his attitude remained, and would often criticise other engines if he felt that they weren't pulling their weight. My take on Ernest has unlocked a childhood memory of mine. I was first introduced to Spencer and Emily through a magazine advert for new Thomas Ertl toys for 2003. The character names weren't written alongside pictures of the engines, instead written separately as part of a checklist, and so I got Spencer and Emily's names mixed up. I thought Emily was called Spencer and imagined him to be a stuffy old authority figure who likes to do things by the book and reminisces about the good old days. I suppose I've had a history with combining different Thomas characters, and I suppose my interpretation of Ernest is a resurrection of this strange misconception. With all that said, here is my finished illustration. If you've ever seen behind the scenes photos of the first series of Thomas and Friends, you may have noticed this black tank engine with no face. This engine was never properly seen in the show, save for a few barely discernible background appearances, but their main job was to move trains in the background of yard scenes to make them feel more like a busy railway. The engine was an off-the-shelf Gauge 1 model manufactured by Marklin or Märklin, hence it is known as the Marklin engine. They're based on a Deutsche Reichsbahn Class 80, a shunting engine, and carries the running number 80031. The real 80031 was withdrawn in 1964. Season 1 of Thomas was adapted from stories originally written in the 1940s and 1950s, many of which were set decades beforehand. However, whereas the original Railway series books have a fixed timeline with definite dates, the same is not true for the TV series, which is deliberately vague with its time period and doesn't necessarily line up with real-life events all the time. Therefore, it could be that Season 1 of Thomas takes place during or after 1964, or maybe number 80031 was withdrawn from service in Germany at an earlier date. The elephant in the room is Marklin engine's lack of face. Some fans have made fan art and trains models of Marklin with a face, and I'm going to be honest, I don't like it. I know all the engines in Thomas and Friends are supposed to have faces. Supposed to. But I feel like the Marklin engine having a visible face kind of removes the intrigue. By never seeing the Marklin engine's face, it creates a mystique around the character, a bit like Slender Man or the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, or maybe just Cow and Chicken's parents. My thinking is that Marklin was purchased by the Fat Controller as a utility engine, basically doing whatever work was needed around the island. Marklin was already an introverted sort, and the fact that they didn't have a specific place on Sodor to call home meant that they didn't form friendships and connections the same way that other engines would. Such things didn't really interest Marklin, who was more concerned about getting a job finished and moving on to the next one. Few engines have seen the Marklin engine's face, and even fewer have heard them speak. I've drawn Marklin travelling along the main line, having finished one job and heading off to do another. In keeping with the Season 1 vibe, I've drawn the engine on this set that we see in a few Season 1 episodes. It only appears a small handful of times, but it might be my favourite set from Season 1. I can just imagine looking over the fence, getting a train spotter's handbook out and just spending an afternoon watching the trains go by. Season 1 sets may be simpler than those of later seasons, but there was clearly still an attempt to make the locations feel lived in and convincing. With that said and done, here is how the final drawing looks. With a series as long running as Thomas, it makes sense that there were some elements left on the cutting room floor. There are two scrap characters that we know much about. Nigel was a character created for the Jack and the Pack spin-off, but not featured in any of the stories, so his model wasn't built. The other, who is more relevant to today's video, is Little Giant. This engine was conceptualised during the pre-production of Season 6 in 2001. However, the decision was ultimately made to scrap the character before the script writing process took place. This was apparently because the production crew were worried that an engine with two faces might have been considered too disturbing. Little Giant is a double Fairley locomotive, a design that would later appear in Thomas and Friends in the form of Mighty Mac. Whereas Mighty Mac is unambiguously two separate characters joined together, it's harder to know if that's true for Little Giant as well. To be fair, that might just be because, unlike Mighty Mac, Little Giant doesn't get separate names for each half. It's not as if one half is called Little and the other half is called Giant. What we do know is that one half of Little Giant has a defeatist attitude, whereas the other is brave and confident. In other words, he's an optimist, but also a realist. It's easy to assume that the defeatist side is bad and the confident side is good, because that's how most people view those emotions. But I think there was potential to tell a story with Little Giant that is perfectly okay, and even appropriate, to feel negative thoughts rather than positive ones. For example, here I've drawn Little Giant struggling with a heavy goods train, which is really pushing the limits of what the engine can handle. The defeatist side reckons that they can't keep going like this, but the confident side disagrees. He motivates the defeatist side to keep going, which will come back to bite him in the, well, I was going to say backside, but I'm not sure where the backside is on a double Fairley engine. I wanted to depict both faces of Little Giant, which can't really be done in a single image, so I've drawn a separate panel in the corner showing the confident side cheering on the defeatist side. I've cheated a bit by making the coupling chain between Little Giant and the trucks much longer than it should be, but that was necessary in order for us to see his face. The additional panel kind of makes this look like part of a comic strip. I think the closest thing we ever got to an official Thomas comic strip was the Thomas and the Magic Railroad manga, and a lot of the artwork in that was just slightly modified key art. If anyone in charge of Thomas is watching this video, which is very unlikely, it would be great to see a Thomas and Friends comic or graphic novel. I'd be more than happy to supply the artwork. I've drawn this scene at Crosney Quern Station. Rusty is concerned for Little Giant's health and asks if they'd like a helping buffer. But before the defeatist side can get a word in, the confident side booms, "No thank you, Rusty, we can manage," though for how long is yet to be seen. And so, here is the completed image. And there we are, 3 mystery engines from the TV series, fleshed out into characters of their own. It's been interesting to work within the lore of the TV series rather than the Railway series for a change, as it has meant approaching the backstories of these characters a little differently than I normally would. Did you have a favourite? Make sure to share your thoughts down below. If you're interested in future videos like this, be sure to subscribe. Click on the right to view the full playlist of these videos, or click on the left to watch a video that I think you'll like.